Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 377. Thank you for joining me. Going to pick up where we left off in the last podcast. We're still talking about Jewish history, and I have a lot to share with you guys today. I want to get back into it. We've been talking about the book of Daniel, and Daniel was one of the exiles from the kingdom of Judah, who was brought to Babylon as a captive. Daniel was one of the early captives before the siege of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, and the thousands of exiles that came back in that final siege. Daniel was brought back early on when Jehoiakim was the king of Judah. King, emphasize king, because we're talking about kings and kingdoms. I made that distinction in the last podcast, and I want to flush that out in this podcast because it's very important to understand that we're talking about kings and kingdoms. And another thing in the last podcast we were talking about is Daniel in the Tanakh, the Jewish version of the Hebrew scriptures. The Christians have the Old Testament, and then the Jews have the Tanakh, which is the corresponding Hebrew scriptures. And the Tanakh is broken up into three sections, like we explained in the last podcast. And Daniel is not included with the prophets in the Tanakh. Daniel is in the writings and the historical writings and poetic writings. See, he's not that important of a prophet to modern Jews, but to Christians, he is a very, very important prophet. And there's a reason why, and we're going to get into a little bit of that today, but I alluded to it in the last podcast, that Daniel is not an important prophet to modern Jews. And we know that the evidence of that is that Daniel is not included with the prophets, the major or minor prophets in the Tanakh. He's included in the writings. And in Christian theology and in the Christian church, Daniel is a huge prophet. And there is a reason why. And I want to get into that today and flesh that out. But we've been talking about the dream that Daniel interprets of Nebuchadnezzar in the second chapter of the book of Daniel. And this is a dream about six kingdoms. Six kingdoms. It's a dream about a statue made of 5 different metals and clay, but each one of these metals is represents a kingdom. The gold head represents the kingdom of Babylon. The chest and arms of silver represents the kingdom of Persia. The waist and thighs of bronze represent the kingdom of Greece. The iron legs represents the kingdom of Rome. And we don't know who this kingdom is, this final kingdom that's iron mixed with clay. I gave my opinion on it, but like I said, there's many different views of what this final kingdom here is. And then there's a sixth kingdom, and the sixth kingdom Daniel talks about here in the second chapter of the book of Daniel. The sixth kingdom this is Daniel interpreted. We're telling, he interprets the dream, tells Nebuchadnezzar what the dream is, and then interprets the dream. But as he's telling him what the dream is, in the 41st verse of the second chapter of the book of Daniel, Daniel says, just as you saw the feet and toes were partially of baked clay and partially of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Hold on. I think I want to go to 31 first. That's where or 34. 34. So Daniel chapter 2, verse 34. And he's explaining to him first what the dream was of this statue, While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not of human hands. This rock was not of human hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were all broken into pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. Blows through the wind. The wind swept them away, swept all these other kingdoms away, leaving no trace. But the rock that was made out of, not made by human hands, that it wasn't a human institution. This is a institution that is not made by human hands, because all the other kingdoms are made by human hands. That's what this suggests, that these are human kingdoms. The Babylonian kingdom is a human kingdom. The Persian kingdom, human kingdom. The Greek kingdom, a human kingdom. The Roman kingdom, human kingdoms. The iron mixed with clay is a human kingdom. But this sixth kingdom that is cut out, a rock that is cut out, but not made with human hands, struck the statue at its feet, smashing all these human kingdoms and scattering them to the wind. The wind swept them away, leaving without a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. And then he explains what that sixth kingdom, the rock not made with human hands, he explains what it is here in the 41st verse. Just as you saw that the feet and the toes were partially of baked clay and partially of iron, so will this kingdom be divided. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. Where's it at? About the rock. Okay, so this is it. This is what the sixth kingdom, the rock not made with human hands. But in the time of those kings, in the time of the human kings, in the times of these kings, the Babylonian king, the Persian king, the Greek king, the Roman king, in the time of those kings, Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom, king, domain, a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. That means that it won't be destroyed, and there won't be a dynasty. It won't be passing down the throne to someone else. That in the days of those kings, of the kings represented by those medals and the statues, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. This goes back to what God prophesies or tells David when he anoints David as king, that you're going to sit on the throne or establish a dynasty that will never end, is what God tells David. That someone from your line, from the line of David, will sit on the throne forever, and there will be no end of that kingdom. Well, this is what Daniel is prophesying to Nebuchadnezzar, that in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left for another. It will crush those kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. So the rock not made by human hands that becomes the mountain, takes over her, represents a kingdom that is going to destroy all the other kingdoms, and this kingdom is going to conquer all these other kingdoms and grow to be a mountain that will never be destroyed. It will never end, a never-ending kingdom. All right, so that brings us to John, the book of John, the Gospel of John. This is chapter 20, and this is when Jesus is being arrested. The night that he is arrested, he is arrested by the Jews, and they take him to the Jewish court first, but then in the morning they take him to the Roman court. And this is when in John chapter 20 verse 28 is when they're taking them to the Roman governor, Pilate. And it says, then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the high priest. Then Jesus, the Jewish high priest, Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning. To avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, they did not want to enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat Passover. This is happening during the Passover. Jesus is arrested, first goes to Caiaphas and the Jewish high priest, and then that morning they take him to the Roman governor, who is Pilate. So Pilate came out to them and asked them, "What charges do you bring against this man? What charges do you have against Jesus? If he were not a criminal," these were what the Jews are replying to Pilate, saying that because Pilate says, what are your charges on him? And he says, well, if he wasn't a criminal, do you think that we'd bring him to you this early in the morning, Pilate? That's what he says here in the 30th verse. If you're not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. So the Jews hand him over to Pilate. Pilate said, take him yourselves and judge him by your own laws. He's a Jew just like you. Take him yourself and judge him by your own laws, which they had already had the trial with Caiaphas, and so they were unable to resolve it. But listen to this. So Pilate says to them, take him to your own courts and judge him yourself. And they'd already had the court with Caiaphas and the high priest, but they're taking him to Pilate for a specific reason, and that specific reason is stated right after Pilate says, take him yourself and judge him by your own laws. They tell Pilate, but we have no right to execute anyone. And they already know what they want. They want execution. They didn't want lashes or imprisonment or anything other than execution. And they're basically telling Pilate that, yeah, we'll take him to our courts and judge him in our court, but we don't have the authority to execute anyone in our courts. They wanted execution. So they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus said about the kind of death he was going to die. And Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? King. Okay, so what you're telling me, and this happens before Jesus is even born. Daniel's in exile. Well, even before that, long before that, God anoints David king of the Jews, tells David that someone from your line is going to be king forever. There's never going to be an end to your line, King David. That someone's going to be, and then Daniel, it gives this interpretation or tells Nebuchadnezzar what his dream means, and says there's going to be this sixth kingdom that is going to destroy all these other kingdoms. Many of these kingdoms hadn't even happened yet when Daniel is saying this. Again, Daniel is not included with the prophets, the Jewish prophets. Many of these kingdoms hadn't even happened yet. The Greek kingdom, the Roman kingdom hadn't even happened yet. But Daniel's telling him these kingdoms are going to come, and then a kingdom not cut of human hands is going to come after that. Is going to wipe out all these other kingdoms. It's going to grow to be a mountain and going to conquer the whole world. And Pilate is asking Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? When they're bringing him, when the Jews are bringing him to Pilate and wanting Pilate to execute him. Now, where would Pilate get the idea that Jesus was the king of the Jews? What does Jesus say? Is that your idea? Jesus asked. Did others talk to you about me? Or did you come up with that idea yourself? Or did others tell you that I was the king of the Jews? I am a Jew. Pilate replied, your own people and chief priest handed you over to me. Your own people and chief priest handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Is what Pilate had asked. What are they accusing you of? What is it you have done? They want me to kill you. What is it that you have done? Jesus answered to them, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. My kingdom is not from this world. My kingdom is from another place. So it's important that you understand that the Jews, the Jewish leaders of that time, they're the ones who handed Jesus over to Pilate. And Pilate was trying to figure out, well, why do they want to kill you so bad? Are you a king? Jesus says, where'd you hear that I was a king? But in fact, yes, I'm a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. Jesus predicts his death. This is in the book of Matthew. This is Matthew 16, just to reemphasize that it was the Jewish leaders who wanted Jesus dead. That's why they brought him to Pilate, so Pilate could execute him. He said, we don't have any power to execute anybody. So this is the 16th. And I wish I had time because the Matthew 16, this is where Peter declares Jesus Messiah, and Jesus tells him that flesh and blood didn't reveal that to you. This is the passage of scripture that Catholics believe establishes Peter as the first pope in Matthew 16. But right after that, the conversation with Peter continues, and Jesus is predicting his own death. He's predicting he's going to go into Jerusalem and be killed. And it says in the 21st verse of Matthew 16, from that time, from the time preceding with the conversation with Peter that I don't have time to get into, it says from that time, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go into Jerusalem and suffer many things, and at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. Those aren't Romans. Those aren't Romans. Jesus isn't saying at the hands of the Romans. He says at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and teachers of the law, that he must be killed and on the third day risen to life. And Peter began to rebuke him. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, which, I mean, if I don't, there's something happening here in this conversation where Peter declares Jesus, the Messiah, that is even more profound than believing that Peter is the first pope and God grants, Peter the keys of heaven and earth. There's a lot more going on here. But I think that it is pretty profound that as that conversation continues, that Jesus tells Peter, get behind me, Satan, that people believe that Jesus had just handed Peter the keys to heaven and earth, but he says, get in that same conversation, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. Do not have the mind, the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. But Jesus says that my kingdom is not of this world. He is, Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? This is all about kingdoms. This is all about kingdoms. And the kingdoms of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, the kingdom of Israel first established first with Saul, but then with David. David is anointed king. And again, God tells David that someone from your family, from your family tree will sit on this throne forever, that there's never going to be an end to this kingdom. I think that it's important to understand that the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, the nation of Israel, to think of it as three different stages of their history. I think that the first stage to think of it is the kingdoms under the kings of Israel and Judah. But after the Babylonian captivity, there were no more kings. There were no more kings. And there were kings, but they weren't Jewish kings. Important distinction, that the Jews that lived under the kingdom of Israel and kingdom of Judah and the king and the Jewish kings, after the Babylonian captivity, they were still kings, but they weren't Jewish kings. They were Gentile kings. So the period of these kings, the Jews are not there. They do not have, except the short period of time during the Hasmonean dynasty that happens after the Maccabean revolt. We talked about this a little bit in the last podcast, but for all of this period of time that this statue represents, the Jews are being ruled over by Gentile kings, by kings that are not Jews. So there's this. It's two different stages of the. I said three, but it's actually two, because even today, people talk about the influence of the nation of Israel and the Jews. I don't particularly buy in to all that for several reasons. That the Jews are running everything. There are a lot of influential Jews that run a lot of very important institutions in our society, but I don't buy into this grand Jewish conspiracy. I believe that it is a satanic conspiracy, and there are a lot of Jews that are involved in it, but there's a lot of people who aren't Jews that are involved in this Satanism as well. Anyway, you're looking at two different existences of the Jewish people. You have the period of the Jewish kings, and then that ends during the Babylonian captivity, and then you have the period of the Gentile kings. And what this statue and this interpretation of this dream represents is not only talking about the different kingdoms, but the kingdoms that would rule over the Jewish people. That the Jewish people are involved in this interpretation of this dream from Nebuchadnezzar about the statue. That not only will Babylon be the head, but what will be happening to the Jews under the Babylonian Empire, the Babylonian kingdom, and then the Persian kingdom. It's not only about the Persian kingdom coming to power and conquering the Babylonian kingdom, but what is the relationship with the Persians and the Jewish people? And then when the Greeks come to power and the Greeks conquer the Persians, it's going to be what the relationship with the Jews are with the Greek Empire. That the Jewish people are basically the timepiece. They're the timepiece of human history, kind of to think about it. And I believe that. I believe that the Jewish people and watching what's happening with the Jewish people is very important. I think it's a very important timepiece, because you had the Jewish kings, and then you have the Gentile kings, and the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, the Jewish kingdom, after the Babylonian captivity, it was basically over. It had ended. And again, the Hasmonean dynasty was a short period of time where there was a dynasty after the Maccabean revolt, but that wasn't from the line of David. So what's going on with this kingdom that God tells David is going to be forever? Is it the same kingdom that Jesus says when he says that my kingdom is not from this world? And the presumption that he presented him, well, it's not a presumption. He did present himself as the Jewish king. We'll get there here in a moment. But this whole idea, and people today, they talk about the nation of Israel and say that the Jews that are in Israel today are not the Jews from the Bible. It's a common saying that you hear people say today, is that the Jews that are in Israel today are not the same Jews from the Bible. And when someone says that, I mean, I want to ask them, what Jews from the Bible are you talking about? Are you talking about the Jews from the from the kingdoms of Israel and the kingdoms of Judah? Or are you talking about the Jews from the kingdom of Persia? Because those are very different Jews. What I'm trying to explain to you is that the Babylonian captivity, it changed the Jewish people significantly. They were in exile for 70 years. How could that not change them? And even though they were able to maintain their Jewish culture and to come back and build the temple, which became the center of their culture again, and to kind of recreate the good old days of the Jewish kingdoms, it wasn't a kingdom anymore. It wasn't a kingdom. They still were, under the control of the Babylonians or the Persians or the Greeks or the Romans. That's why the Jews, when they wanted to execute Jesus, they had to bring him to Pilate and say, Pilate, you have to execute him because we have no power to execute him. Now, in the times of the kings, of the Jewish kings, if the Jewish kings wanted to execute someone, they didn't have to ask anyone. In the times of the Jewish kingdoms, King Saul, King David, King Jeroboam, King Rehoboam, all the Jewish kings, when they were sovereign over the land, they didn't have to go get permission to the Romans, from the Romans if they wanted to execute someone or if they wanted to stone someone according to the law of Moses. They didn't need to get permission from anyone because they were the kings. They were a sovereign kingdom with a Jewish king. But under the Gentile kingdoms, if they want to execute someone, they have to take them to Pilate because the Romans are in charge. The Romans have to execute him. So the point I'm making is that when you talk about the Jewish people of today and say, are they the same Jewish people of the Bible? You got to tell me what you're talking about. You're talking about the Jews under the kings of the Jewish kings of the kings of Israel, the kings of Judah? Or are you talking about the Jews under the Gentile kings, under Nebuchadnezzar, under the Persians, under Alexander the Great? Because I would say that those are different people. I want to play this first clip. And this gets into what I'm talking about. This is Pastor Wieben. Joel Wieben is one of these pastors who is considered a Christian nationalist, very conservative. I've played clips from him before. I believe that his church is in central Texas. But I want you to listen to what he says here.
That many of the Jewish people in AD 70, they saw it as the exact fulfillment to the words of Christ, and they realized in that moment, oh my goodness, he was right.
So AD 70, what is he talking about? He's talking about the destruction of the second temple that we talked about in the last podcast, that Zerubbabel led the people out of exile back to Jerusalem after the decree of Cyrus. They built the second temple, and then about 500 years later, the Romans come in and they destroy that second temple. This is the second time their temple, the center of their culture, has been destroyed in 70 AD, and then the diaspora spread again. That's what Pastor Wieben is talking about here.
That many of the Jewish people in AD 70, they saw it as the exact fulfillment to the words of Christ, and they realized in that moment, oh my goodness, he was right. We crucified our Messiah. And they actually got out. Many were destroyed and died in Jerusalem who did not believe. They stayed thinking, oh, we'll make it. God will defend us. They stayed and they were conquered and they died. But the ones who escaped, they escaped because they saw it as a fulfillment to Christ's words, and they believed, they heard and believed his words. And they said, whoa, this is what Jesus said would happen before us. This generation passed away. He actually was the Messiah, and we should believe in him, salvation. So they became Christians, and also we should practically obey him by getting out of Dodge. And so the Jews who lived were the Jews who became Christians. They converted to Christianity. They believed the words of Jesus, and they fled. They escaped from that desolation in AD 70.
So that's not entirely true what he's saying. Partially true what he's saying. I just want to clarify that all of the early Christians were Jews. All of them. They're in Jerusalem. All of the early Christians are Christians that saw him crucified, that saw his miracles, that they lived there alongside of the same Jews that took Jesus to Pilate and and charged Pilate to execute him. So these Jews that believed in Jesus and Jews that didn't believe Jesus lived together in the land of Judah, Palestine, together for a number of years after Jesus was crucified. They lived together. Jews who believed that Jesus was the Messiah and Jews that didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And this is before any Gentile had ever believed Jesus was the Messiah and accepted Jesus as Messiah. Before any, there was ever a Gentile Christian, all the early Christians were Jews. That's very important. That's what he says. But they didn't leave, these Christian Jews didn't leave before 70 AD and when the Romans came in and destroyed the temple. Many of these Christian Jews, Messianic Jews, were there when the temple was destroyed, and they even stayed there alongside Jews, non-believing Jews. They stayed there in that land even after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. They actually stayed there for another almost 70 years until after the Bar Kokhba revolt. Told you about the Bar Kokhba revolt before, but this is the last revolt. And if you understand, when we get into this in talking about the Maccabean revolt, that the Maccabean revolt was the first revolt. That's where the Hasmonean dynasty came from, is them winning the revolt against the Greeks and establishing that dynasty. But when the Romans came on the scene, they end that monarchy and that dynasty, and basically they subjugate the Jews. And then the Jews continued revolting against the Romans all the way up into the Bar Kokhba revolt, is the last revolt, which happens in 132, 136 in the 2nd century. So this is some 60 plus, almost 70 years after the destruction of the temple, that you had Christian Jews and non-Christian Jews living together in the land of Judea and Palestine, living together. And it was this revolt that basically finalized the scattering of the diaspora, even after the temple was destroyed, and they start leaving. And there's this friction between the Christian Jews and the non-Christian Jews, because there's a rabbi who claims that Bar Kokhba is the Messiah, and the Christian Jews would not agree that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. So that they have this riff, so I wanted to clarify what Weeben is saying here. It's not technically true that many of the Christian Jews were there during the destruction of the temple, and even after the destruction of the temple, all the way to the Bar Kokhba revolt.
Conquered, and they died. But the ones who escaped, they escaped because they saw it as a fulfillment to Christ's words, and they heard and believed his words. And they said, whoa, this is what Jesus said would happen before us, this generation, passed away. He actually was the Messiah, and we should believe in him, salvation. So they became Christians, and also we should practically obey him by getting out of Dodge. And so the Jews who lived were the Jews who became Christians. They converted to Christianity, they believed the words of Jesus, and they fled. They escaped from that desolation in AD 70, and they mingled. Therefore, they no longer have a nation state, which means they're now refugees in other places. They committed themselves, this is the logical conclusion, committed themselves to the apostolic teaching of the New Testament that says it is not about one who is a Jew outwardly of the flesh, but inwardly, not circumcision of the flesh, but circumcision of the heart. So they no longer put stock in their Jewishness according to the flesh, believed that Jesus was the Messiah, converted to Christianity, escaped the judgment. All the ones who didn't have this heart change stayed and died in the judgment. And so now these guys, they're Christians, they're alive, and they're not putting stock in the flesh anymore, and they don't have a nation state to mingle in anymore. So they're dispersed, a dispersion among all these other Gentile countries, and they logically intermarried with them. And so who are the physical Jews today? Here it is. Nobody. There are Palestinians. They've swabbed 2,000-year-old catacombs underneath Israel, and there are Palestinians that actually match up more than Ashkenazi Jews. And there are people who argue for the black Hebrew Israelites, and people who argue, well, the Caucasians, because they dispersed them above the Caucasus Mountain. Here, I love all those views. You know why I love them? Not because I believe them. I love all those views because I love every time somebody comes to me and says, white people are actually the physical descendants. Black people are the descendants. Palestinians are the descendants. Ashkenazi Jews are the descendants. Or here's an alternative. Titus destroyed the temple. The birth records were literally kept in the temple so that God in his providence saw fit that no one would be able to prove who actually was a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why? Because it doesn't matter. Because now what matters is faith in Christ.
All right. So there's a lot of what he says that I do agree with. I don't agree with all of it. And just like I just showed you that he was wrong about saying that Christian Jews left before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD is not true. The majority of the Jews don't leave the area even after destruction of the temple. They keep revolting up until the 130s, and the Bar Kokhba revolt is the last of the revolts, and that's when all of the Jews leave the land of Palestine, the land of Judea. But this idea that that the Jews that are in Israel today, the Jews that have come back in the Zionist movement that started in the 19th century and was made official in 1948, that those are not the Jews from the Bible. Those are not the real Jews and descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So they have no claim to the land because they're not the real Jews. And this was a issue that even Zerubbabel, like I told you in the last podcast, there's been 3 different Zionist movements: the one that happened after the Exodus, the one that happened after the exile, and then the one that happened in the early 19th century that was made official in 1948. And in each one of those Zionist movements, there was already someone living in that land when they came back, or when they came. In the story of the Exodus, the Canaanites are already there. In the story of after the exile, there are people that are living there. Some of them are Jews, some of them are not. They begin to intermarry with some of these people. They begin to have issues with the people that were already settling there. They saw themselves as different. The people that are coming back from exile and the people who had been living there. And same thing today. The Palestinians that were there when the 1948 nation of Israel was created, and you see the conflicts that they've been having for the past 70 years. So this is not something new, what you see going on today. This happened in the period after the Babylonian exile. So you're going to tell me that nobody is a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob today? What happened to all these people? What happened to the northern 10 tribes when they were scattered in 700 BCE by the Assyrians? What happened to these people? What happened to the people that were scattered after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and the Bar Kokhba revolt? What happened to those people? None of those people descend back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and have a claim to the land, a biblical claim to the land. That's ridiculous. I don't believe that. And I don't believe that everyone who says that they are a descendant from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But I also don't believe that nobody is. And I honestly don't think that it even matters at this point. I don't think that it matters at all. But that is a huge issue, even, and it goes back. You heard what Pastor Wieben says. He mentioned the Ashkenazi Jews several times. He doesn't mention any of the other Jews, and there are many different other Jewish groups besides the Ashkenazi Jews. The Ashkenazi Jews are the Jews in Northern Europe. Like I said in the last podcast, the modern Zionist movement started with the Ashkenazi Jews. Without a doubt, the Rothschilds are Ashkenazi Jews. David ben Gurion is a Ashkenazi Jews. Theodor Herzl, Ashkenazi Jews. The Russian Jews that started the modern Zionist movement are Ashkenazi Jews, but Ashkenazi Jews are not the only Jews. You have Sephardic Jews. You have Mizrahi Jews. You have the Beta Israel Jews. You have the Bnei Menashe Jews in India. You have the sub-Saharan Jews. There's many different people. You have the Black Hebrew Israelites. Now, do I believe the Black Hebrew Israelites are really the descendants of the Jews from the Bible? whether you're talking about the Jews from the Bible during the Gentile kings or the Jewish kings. I mean, no. Mormons believe that the Jews got on boats before the destruction of the temple and sailed to the New World, and that they were that all of the Native Americans are descendants from Jews. Do I believe that? No. But I also don't believe that nobody, like what Pastor Wieben says, descends from the Jews and from the Jews from the Bible, or descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I believe that because I have to believe that because that was the promise that God made to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, that I will make your descendants as great as the stars in the sky. And then they all just disappeared. Is that what you believe, Pastor Wieben? That makes no sense. But this idea of the Jews, of the current Jews in the nation of Israel today, not having any association with the Jews from the Bible, not being descendants from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and imposters that have taken the land in Israel and have no biblical, I emphasize biblical, have no biblical claim to that land because they are not the true descendants. That claim has been made over and over again to basically to counter the modern nation of Israel. We remember the journalist Helen Thomas, that was the White House correspondent that got fired after she's asked in a park, do you have anything to say to about the Jews, or do you have anything to say about Israel? And she says, tell them to go home. Tell them to go back to Germany, is what she says. And then she gets fired. She's Lebanon, and they accused, she's from Lebanon. She's Lebanese, and they accused her of being anti-Semitic. And she says, what are you talking about? I'm Semitic. I'm from Lebanon. I'm not anti-Semitic. She says that the people that are moving into the region of Palestine today are coming from Europe, and they're the ones who are not Semitic. And this is what John Philby says. We've talked about John Philby before, but he was the MI6 officer after the Balfour Declaration. He went to Saudi Arabia, and he befriended the king of Saudi Arabia. He was an advisor to the king of Saudi Arabia, and he famously said in his memoir about the Arab hostility to Jewish immigration into Palestine. Jack Philby says that the true basis of the Arab hostility to the Jewish immigration into Palestine is xenophobia, the instinctive perception that the vast majority of Central and Eastern European Jews seeking admission are not Semites at all. Whatever political repercussions of their settlement may be, their advent is regarded as a menace to the Semitic culture of Arabia. The European Jew of today, with his secular outlook, is regarded as an unwelcome intruder within the gates of Arabia, is what Jack Philby says. So, and this is a very common belief amongst a lot of people, and you're not really even allowed to talk about it, but we need to talk about this. This is a conversation that needs to be had. Are the Jews in Israel today the Jews from the Bible? Either the Jews from the Jewish kings or Jews from the secular kings. Are they the Jews from the Bible? There's this passage in the Bible in Genesis 10, and this is after the flood and Noah's sons and his wife. They come out of the flood, and then his sons marry, and they end up having children, and it's saying what the descendants of the sons of Noah's, who they are. It says that the sons of Japheth are Gomer, Magog, Madi, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, Tyrus, and then the sons of Gomer are Ashkenaz, is what it says. Ashkenaz, Repheth, Tugamoth. And then it says here, this is in the NIV, and it says that from these the maritime people spread out into the territories by their clans, within their nations, each with its own language. So basically, this is saying after Noah's sons, they become the fathers of the different tribes and nations of people throughout the earth, is basically what it says. But if you look into the way that the King James translates this in the 5th verse of the chapter 10 of Genesis, it says, "By these were the isles of the Gentiles, divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, and after their nation." So basically, the sons of Noah created new nations, new tribes all over the world, and it says that Ashkenaz here was from the Gentile nation. So a lot of people have leaned on this verse and says, look, it says right here in Genesis chapter 10 that Ashkenaz is a Gentile. So that means that Ashkenazi Jews are Gentiles, that they're not Jews at all. And people have said this. Again, this is the way that it's translated in the King James, and then it's translated different in the NIV. I haven't really looked at any of the other translations, but I noticed this difference. And I point that out because we're getting ready to listen to Pastor Stephen Anderson here from Arizona, a very controversial pastor, very right-wing pastor. I guess you can call him right-wing. I guess under he's kind of like in the same vein of Pastor Wieben here. But I want you to listen to him. He reads from Genesis 10 from the King James, and I want you to listen to what he says.
Today I want to talk about Genesis chapter 10, verses 2 through 5, where the Bible reads, "The sons of Japheth, Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshach and Tiras, and the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz and Riphath and Togarmah, and the sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, in their nations." Now, the reason that I read those scriptures to you is that they clearly state that Ashkenaz is one of the Gentile nations. Now, 80 to 85% of today's so-called Jewry, those who claim to be Jews in the world today, 80 to 85% of them are what is known as Ashkenazi Jews. And an Ashkenazi Jew is so named because he primarily descends from this guy in the Bible named Ashkenaz, which is clearly listed.
So he says 85% of all the Jews in the world is about 15 million Jews in the world. He says about 80. Now, remember, I've told you that there's so many. So there's Ashkenazi, there's Sephardic, there's Mizrahi, there's the Beta Israel in Africa. There's the B'nai Menashe in India. There's sub-Saharan African Jews. That there's all these different Jews, but he says 80 to 85% are Ashkenazi. I don't know. I haven't looked into that if that's true, but I would probably say that the majority of the 15 to 16 million Jews on the planet are Ashkenazi. I just don't know if it's as high as 85%, but that's what he says here.
Descends from this guy in the Bible named Ashkenaz, which is clearly listed as one of the Gentile nations. Now, the reason for this is that there was a nation of people who were of Japheth, who were Europeans, white people, known as the Khazars. And in the 8th century after Christ, the whole nation of the Khazars turned unto Judaism. They converted to the religion of Judaism. Of course, it was a false, Christ-rejecting religion. And for a few hundred years, the empire of the Khazars was a power in Eastern Europe, and they followed the religion of Judaism. but eventually they were defeated by the Russians and they were scattered into Eastern Europe. And so a lot of the Eastern European Jews today are the descendants of the Khazars. And in fact,
all right, so this is part of this theory. I don't know that this is true at all. I've looked into it, and there's some holes in this whole Khazar theory. There's some holes in it, and again, I don't even know that it matters. But this is this story about the Khazars is also part of this narrative to say that the Jews that are in Israel today are imposters, that they don't have any genetic heritage to the Jews from the Bible, to be the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that these are Jewish converts, that the kingdom of Khazaria the king converted to Judaism. So that means that the whole kingdom becomes Jews, and these Caucasian, white, European Jews came from the kingdom of Khazars, and they were Jewish converts. This is the whole story. I have a clip that goes into the whole story, and we'll probably end with that. But this is a very, very popular point of view, and it needs to be discussed. I saw this on X, and it says that Israelis are not Israelites. What does that mean? Israelis are not Israelites. That means that the people of Israel today, they're in the land today, are not the same as the people from the Bible. Whether you're talking about the Jewish kings or the secular kings, you're talking about before the destruction of Solomon's temple or before the destruction of Zerubbabel's temple, the second temple. No matter who you're talking about, and those are vastly different people. I would say that the people that came back to and built the temple and built the city, not only would I say the evidence is right there. They had a lot of, they were the same. They were humans. They had the same human eras. They didn't get any better when they came back from exile. That's why the second temple is destroyed. Just like the first temple is destroyed because of divine punishment, the second temple is also destroyed because of divine punishment, because these people are human and they have human flaws, the same flaws that we all do. And they didn't get any better after the exile. But it says Israelis are not Israelites. Khazars are not Semites. Ashkenazis are not Hebrews. The Talmud is not the Torah. Yiddish is not Aramaic. The satanic bankers who created the country of Israel in 1948 are imposters. They are not real Jews. And this has been shared. Hold on. Yeah, my phone on silent. It keeps going on. And this has been shared many times. This is what a lot of people believe, that the Ashkenazis, particularly the Ashkenazis, they're not talking about the Mizrahi or the Sephardic or the Ethiopian Jews. Nobody's talking about it. It's only the Ashkenazis. They're only focused on the Ashkenazis. And it usually goes back to the case of usury in Europe and the banking cartels that mostly came out of the Ashkenazis. There weren't that many Beta Israel Ethiopians, in the banking industry. This is the Ashkenazi. So he mentions that. But this is all to say that because the current Zionist movement started in Europe with Ashkenazis, that means that the nation of Israel today is illegitimate, because the Jews that are in Israel today are not the same Jews from the Bible. Israelis are not Israelites, is what it says. And in this clip, this will probably be the last clip. It goes further into this whole idea about the Khazar theory. And then we'll pick this up in the next podcast. But this is a pretty long clip, so this will probably be the last one.
Once upon a time, in a faraway land called Khazaria, the king decided to convert to Judaism. His people followed suit, and centuries later, they fled to Eastern Europe, and voila! This is how Ashkenazi Jews were born. It's a neat little origin story, straight out of a Disney film. Aladdin wasn't really a prince, Ariel wasn't really human, and Jews aren't really Jews. But hold up. Carpets can't fly, fish can't talk, and Agrabah is totally a made-up place. Khazaria, on the other hand, was a real kingdom in a real place at a real time. So the big question is, could Ashkenazi Jews really trace their roots back there? Or is this Khazar origin story just a fairy tale? Ashkenazi Jews make up most of the world's Jewish population today.
All right, so there it is right there. 72%. Pastor Anderson said that Ashkenazis were 85%. So according to this, came out 3 months ago, that their statistics have 72%, but that's still a overwhelming amount of the world's Jews, the 15, 16 million Jews, 72% are Ashkenazi. So
could Ashkenazi Jews really trace their roots back there? Or is this Khazar origin story just a fairy tale? Ashkenazi Jews make up most of the world's Jewish population today. And according to the mainstream view, their ancestors arrived in the Rhineland and Danube Valley after the Roman exile, before spreading across Eastern Europe over the centuries. My family tree includes Ashkenazi ancestors, as well as Sephardi and Mizrahi. Trace any one of those branches back far enough, and you'll end up in ancient Israel. Or at least that's the conventional story. But not everyone accepts that version of history. Back in the 1800s, a provocative theory took shape, that Ashkenazi Jews weren't descended from ancient Israelites at all, but rather that they were descendants of the Khazars. So, who were the Khazars? Khazaria was an independent semi-nomadic Turkic kingdom in what's now southern Russia, wedged between a powerful Christian empire to the west and a formidable Muslim caliphate to the east. It was an important trade route connecting east and west, and it also played a role as a cultural melting pot, where people of various religions were free to practice. This included a vibrant Jewish community. Now, here's where things take a surprising turn. According to various Jewish, Muslim, and Christian sources, in the 9th century, King Bulan decided to become Jewish. Some accounts claim that the king weighed the three Abrahamic faiths against each other and ultimately chose Judaism. Why Judaism?
So we know that this happened. So I don't know if you heard how many sources confirmed that the king of Khazaria converted to Judaism. This is true. Khazar was a real place. The king converted to Judaism. That's true too.
Here's where things take a surprising turn. According to various Jewish, Muslim, and Christian sources, in the 9th century,
various Jewish, Christian, and Muslim sources confirmed that the king of Khazaria converted to Judaism.
This included a vibrant Jewish community. Now, here's where things take a surprising turn. According to various Jewish, Muslim, and Christian sources, in the 9th century, King Bulan decided to become Jewish. Some accounts claim that the king weighed the three Abrahamic faiths against each other and ultimately chose Judaism. Why Judaism? There's no way to know King Bulan's true motivation. Maybe it was a true spiritual calling. Or maybe it was a savvy political move to avoid angering the Christian and Muslim superpowers on his borders, while still remaining neutral in their never-ending religious conflicts. Or maybe just like Hanukkah. Now, if the king started practicing Judaism, it's reasonable to assume others followed his lead. But just how many? We don't know. Some sources claim that over the centuries, Khazaria became an overwhelmingly Jewish kingdom. But many historians are skeptical.
They're digging in the wrong place.
It's a widely debated topic that's led to some fascinating questions. Like this design.
It's a widely debated topic that's led to some fascinating questions. This is a widely debated topic. It needs to be debated more. People need to be having this discussion. And I think that it's an important discussion because it fuels a lot of the anti-Semitism and the hatred of Israel today. Now, some of the actions of the Jewish leadership today also fuel that, but this fuels it too.
Became an overwhelmingly Jewish kingdom, but many historians are skeptical.
They're digging in the wrong place.
It's a widely debated topic that's led to some fascinating questions, like this design, found engraved on a metal disc at a Khazar site. Is it a Star of David or a shamanistic sun disk? And even if Judaism became widespread among Khazarians, there's no way to know how many of those Jews actually came from Khazar families that converted and how many came from ethnically Jewish families who migrated to the area.
So that's the question. That's the question too, that even if it's true that many of these people came from the kingdom of Khazar and they're converts to Judaism, I mean, we know that some are ethnically Jews. We know that after the Spanish exile, in the 15th century that many of the Jews, Sephardic Jews from Spain, they migrated to the north and into Poland and integrated with the Ashkenazi, and they fled to that region for safety. There were some conflicts between the Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews when the Sephardic Jews migrated into Northern Europe. But that's the question. I mean, do we know for a fact that all of these people have no ethnic ties to the Jewish people, and that all of them are converts? It's impossible to know. It's impossible to know. And I think maybe that's what Pastor Wieben was talking about when he's saying that nobody is Jews. Well, I don't think that's the answer either. But I think that the answer is it's impossible to know. But that doesn't mean that nobody is. It means that nobody has a genetic tie to Abraham, Isaac, to Jacob. I don't believe that everyone who says that they are do, but it doesn't mean that nobody is just because it's confusing and it's impossible to know.
Is our site. Is it a Star of David or a shamanistic sun disk? And even if Judaism became widespread among Khazarians, there's no way to know how many of those Jews actually came from Khazar families that converted and how many came from ethnically Jewish families who migrated to the area. Remember, Khazar was a melting pot of tolerance where Jewish refugees were welcome, all the more so after the king himself started practicing Judaism. I think it's important to emphasize that in Judaism, converts are treated exactly the same as people who are born Jewish.
That's a very important point that he says there, that it doesn't matter. That's why I said it doesn't matter. Because in Judaism, a convert to Judaism is just as Jewish as someone who has the genetic heritage going back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A convert is just the same.
To emphasize that in Judaism, converts are treated exactly the same as people who are born Jewish. So what's the difference? Well, here's where things get a bit more controversial. According to the Khazar theory, the kingdom was filled with practicing Jews who were descended from Turkic converts, not from ancient Judeans. And when the kingdom was conquered, all of these Turkic Jews flooded the neighboring regions of Eastern Europe, becoming the ancestors of modern Ashkenazi Jews. That would mean that Ashkenazi Jews, the majority of today's Jews, have no ancestral connection to ancient Israel, no biological link to Abraham, Moses, or the people of the Bible. Instead, they're descendants of medieval Turkic nomads who adopted Judaism. This obsession with Jewish biology or Jewish lineage is what makes this a dangerous conspiracy theory. It's been weaponized to deny Jewish identity, delegitimize Israel, and fuel anti-Semitic conspiracies that have led to real-world violence. Here's how the Khazar theory gets used today.
Much of European Jews and much of the European Jewish colonizers of Palestine are all descendants of medieval converts to Judaism.
And then there's the 2019 Jersey City shooter who took people's lives in a Jewish supermarket.
The kosher grocery store with mostly Jewish customers and workers was not a random target.
He referred to his Jewish victims as Khazars.
All right, so we'll pick this back up in the next podcast. I think it's a very, very important conversation, and we're going to pick it back up talking about this question. The question is, are the Jews in Israel today the same Jews from the Bible? The same Jews from the Jewish kings, and even the same Jews after the Babylonian exiles in the period of the Gentile kings. We'll talk about this on Friday. Hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you on Friday.